A gentle drizzle misted over the stone-paved walkway behind the Jazzhole, an iconic bookstore nestled in the upscale Ikoyi district of Lagos. It was late October, and the air carried a mild, almost melancholic humidity. Isabel Morgan, 29, stepped out the back door with a heavy black trash bag in tow. She wore a sun-faded mustard raincoat, sleeves fraying at the edges. Her damp chestnut hair clung to her cheeks, and her worn-out rubber boots squished against the puddle-laced path behind St. Gregory's Catholic Church. Her breath formed wisps in the cool tropical air, unusual for this part of the city. She paused, looking up at the bright red flame tree leaves trembling under the mist, like they too were reluctant to let go of warmth. For a fleeting moment, peace returned to her long, book-filled workday, sorting dusty old novels, helping customers find rare finds, sometimes escaping into a page herself in a cozy corner of the store. Then the stillness shattered by a quiet but wrenching sound. A broken sob, deep and muffled, echoed from the shadows near the alleyway wall. Isabel turned her head sharply, listening. It wasn't loud, but it pulsed with the kind of grief that crawled under your skin. She set the trash bag aside, wiped her hands on her canvas apron, and cautiously walked toward the sound. Rain soaked through her coat, chilling her skin, but she pressed forward. Something about that cry felt achingly familiar. As she approached, the glow from a flickering street lamp revealed a figure. A man sat slouched near the dumpster, head bowed, broad shoulders trembling. He wore what had once been an expensive black tuxedo, now drenched and dirtied. His Italian leather shoes were splattered with mud, and in one hand he loosely held a glinting gold wedding band, abandoned on the concrete like a vow broken in silence. He didn't look up, just kept crying. Not loudly but deeply, like a man trying to hide his pain, and failing. Isabel stood still, breath quiet, blending with the soft patter of the Lagos rain. She didn't know who he was, but she knew that kind of loss, the kind that hollows you out. Like when she stood at the graveside of her parents and baby brother, years ago after a fatal road accident on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, or when she walked in on her fiancé and her best friend in the penthouse she thought would be her forever home. That kind of betrayal burned slow. It had been 3 years since she canceled her engagement. She didn't heal by pretending to forget, but by staying open to those who were hurting too. And this man was hurting. Without hesitation, Isabel stepped forward and knelt beside him. The cold stone seeped through her jeans, but she didn't flinch. She gently placed a hand on his shoulder, the same way she once comforted lost children in the bookstore's reading nook. He flinched and looked up briefly. Tear-rimmed eyes, piercing and bloodshot, met hers for a second before he turned away, ashamed. But Isabel didn't leave. She gently pulled him into a hug, not too tight, just firm enough for him to feel it, that someone was there. The scent of expensive cologne mingled with the wet earth in her rain-soaked coat, imprinting on her senses forever. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered, voice calm and soft like steady rain. "I'm just here." He didn't respond, but little by little she felt the tension in his frame ease. The sobs quieted. The only sound left was the steady rhythm of rain. They sat like that for a long time, two strangers, nameless, without stories, sharing pain in a back alley behind a bookstore. Isabel didn't ask questions. Sometimes a hug said more than words could ever reach. Finally, when the sobs ceased entirely, she pulled away. The man didn't speak, just wiped his face with the back of a wet, trembling hand. She rose to her feet, ready to leave, but then she saw it, the wedding band still glinting on the stone ground. It looked so fragile, like a piece of someone's hope that didn't survive. Without thinking, Isabel picked it up. Her cold fingers brushed the gold. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was kindness. Quietly, she slipped the ring into the pocket of his suit jacket and walked away. As she re-entered the rear entrance of the Jazzhole, the Lagos rain continued, soft, persistent, almost like a lullaby. She glanced back once more. He was still sitting there, but now the ring was with him, a silent token, a mystery she didn't need to solve. Inside the bookstore, she removed her raincoat, revealing a simple gray cardigan. She ran her hands through damp hair and exhaled slowly. This wasn't the first time she'd helped a stranger, expecting nothing in return. It was the only way she knew how to keep her heart from closing again. Isabel Morgan, 29, was known as gentle and generous, but her heart carried scars time hadn't erased. 7 years ago, she lost her entire family in a head-on collision caused by a drunk driver. She should have been in that car, if not for a weekend shift at the Jazzhole. Since then, grief had wrapped around her like an invisible shawl. Then 3 years ago, she found her fiancé entwined with her childhood friend in the home she decorated with dreams. She'd called off the wedding, returned the ring, cut ties, chose a quieter life among books and strangers. She never chased attention, never looked for love. But when someone needed help, she was there, quietly, calmly. Kindness, for her, was not performative. It was survival, a thread tying her to the world. And maybe, just maybe, tonight that hug wasn't just for him. Maybe it was for herself, too. The next morning, Lagos woke up humming with unusual tension. The rain had stopped, leaving glassy puddles on the cobbled driveways of Victoria Island and a heavy scent of wet dust hanging in the air. Behind the curved wooden counter at the Jazzhole, Isabel was quietly flipping through an old leather-bound book on West African trees when her coworker, Hazel, breezed in through the front door. Hazel's short, sea-green bob peeked from under a dripping umbrella, and in her hand was a rolled-up issue of City Beat Lagos. She dropped it onto the counter with a dramatic slap. "You seen this?" Hazel grinned, breathless. Isabel looked up. The front-page headline made her blink. Tech billionaire Noah West abandoned at the altar, bride missing without a trace. Below it was a grainy image of a tall, suited man standing alone under the chandeliers of a luxurious banquet hall in Eco Hotel Suites, an empty chair by his side. The article detailed how Noah West, 32-year-old CEO of Novalink, a cutting-edge Nigerian tech company, was left by his fiancée just hours before they were supposed to say their vows. No note, no explanation. She simply vanished 2 hours before the wedding, leaving guests confused and media outlets salivating. Hazel cackled softly. "They say he's as cold as Lagos granite, but getting ditched like that? Ouch, that ego's definitely melted." Isabel offered a small, polite smile, but didn't say a word. Gossip had never interested her, but the name Noah West stirred something strange inside, like a puzzle piece that didn't fit anywhere but still demanded attention. She slowly shut the book and returned to labeling a stack of children's titles destined for a donation to schools in rural Kogi State. She didn't say it aloud, but a part of her heart quietly wondered, could that man from the alley have been Noah West? Across Lagos, the news spread like a flood. From boutique coffee lounges on Banana Island to fashion showrooms in Lekki, everyone whispered about the jilted groom. Hashtags like #left the Asoebi trended on X. Online, jokes flew wildly, some saying Noah's bride was probably AI-generated and had simply auto-deleted herself. What no one knew, what no one could possibly guess, was that just nights before, Noah West had been curled in the shadows behind St. Gregory's Catholic Church, weeping quietly in a stranger's arms. And Isabel, the one who'd held him in that rain, had no idea that the man she'd comforted in the dark was the same billionaire now splashed across tabloids. 3 days later, the small brass bell above the Jazzhole's entrance jingled. Isabel, perched on a stepladder with a stack of hardcovers balanced on her knee, heard slow, deliberate footsteps approach. She turned and froze mid-motion. There he was, the man from the alley. No tuxedo this time, just a charcoal gray wool coat and crisp navy trousers. His dark brown hair was neatly combed back, and though the redness in his eyes had faded, there was still something hollow there. In one hand he held a wrinkled note with scribbled lines. "Excuse me," he said, voice smooth but roughened, like it had been unused for days. "Do you have The Alchemist?" Isabel carefully set the books down and stepped off the ladder. She recognized him, not from the blurry photo in the tabloids, but from the weight in his shoulders, from the silence between sobs. This was him, the man she'd hugged in the rain. She remembered her whisper that night, that the alchemist had helped her through her darkest moments. She never expected him to remember, let alone walk through the doors of the Jazzhole. Noah tilted his head slightly and gave a tight-lipped smile. Do you always hug strangers in dark alleys? Or am I just your lucky break? The sarcasm was light, but his eyes scanned her face with curiosity, as though trying to solve a riddle. Isabel's cheeks flushed. Banter had never been her strong suit, especially not with men like him. Only when they look like they need it, she said quietly and turned toward the classic fiction section to compose herself. She tried to stay calm, but her thoughts raced. He's Noah West. The man from the alley is Noah West. Before she could grab the book, a customer near the till lowered his voice and whispered to a friend, "Isn't that the guy who got left at the altar?" The murmurs began, soft but sharp, eyes shifting toward the back of the store. Noah's jaw tensed. His fingers crushed the paper in his hand. Isabel moved quickly, brushing his sleeve gently. "Come with me." She led him to a quiet corner by the philosophy shelves, where tall, dusty tomes formed a private nook. "Don't mind them," she said softly. "Lagos loves a scandal. Give it a week, they'll be on to someone else." Noah looked at her, really looked, beyond her soft features and quiet voice, like he was trying to see what wasn't being said. "You save people a lot, don't you?" he asked, voice lower this time, no sarcasm. "Maybe," she replied, turning back to the shelves and sliding out a worn copy of The Alchemist. "This one's not new, but it's got soul." He took the book, his fingers tracing the worn cover with thought. "Thanks," he murmured, but he didn't leave immediately. His eyes lingered, like maybe this bookstore, and maybe she, were the only parts of the world that made sense right now. When he finally left, the bell jingled softly. Isabel remained by the shelf, holding a book she forgot to shelve, and watched through the rain-spattered glass as Noah stepped out onto the street. To the rest of the world, he was the billionaire, the tech genius, the abandoned groom. But to her, he was the man from the alley, the one who cried, the one who left behind a ring and a mystery. And in her quiet heart, she wasn't sure if she wanted to solve it. The days after Noah's unexpected visit blurred into a calm routine at the Jazzhole, but not the same as before. Something had shifted. Without fanfare or explanation, Noah West began showing up more often. At first, he came with excuses, asking for books Isabel had once mentioned during their brief exchange in the rain. The Alchemist, Man's Search for Meaning. The Little Prince Quiet. Introspective titles. But over time, it was less about the books and more about her. He would linger, not intrusively, just quietly browsing shelves, sometimes standing near her as she sorted old novels or wrapped children's books for donation. Their conversations were awkward, fleeting, full of pauses, but there was something grounding about them. The Jazzhole's warm lighting, the musky scent of paper, the distant hum of cars outside, this place had become their unspoken meeting point. Isabel never pried. She recommended her favorites, The Night Circus, Letters to a Young Poet, The Book Thief. But she never asked why he kept returning. She already sensed the reason. Once, while holding The Alchemist, he turned to her and asked quietly, "Do you really believe the universe helps you find what you want?" She smiled softly, setting down her pen. "I think sometimes we help ourselves first. Then the universe follows." He didn't answer, just nodded thoughtfully, eyes lingering on her a little longer than usual. But not everyone was as quietly charmed by Noah's presence. Hazel, 25, Isabel's closest friend and colleague, wasn't subtle with her suspicions. Petite, bold, and always dressed in quirky t-shirts and mismatched earrings, Hazel had a sharp tongue and a louder heart. One slow afternoon after Noah left, having stumbled through a brief conversation about Nigerian sci-fi authors, Hazel pulled Isabel aside. Her tone was blunt. "That's Noah West, billionaire, tech genius. National gossip headline. What exactly does he want here? Isabel looked confused. Books? Hazel raised a brow. Right, because powerful, emotionally unavailable billionaires randomly wander into cozy bookstores in Ikoyi and hang around sweet girls with quiet smiles. Isabel sighed, her voice low. Hazel, I just don't want to see you hurt again, Hazel cut in. I've been there, remember? Dated a poet who turned out to be broke, lazy, and wanted rent money. I believed his pain. I gave him everything. He left. Isabel nodded, understanding. But Noah's not like that. You don't know that, Hazel snapped. You know who he is, but not what he is. Isabel turned away, placing a book on the return shelf. I'm not giving anything, just book suggestions. Hazel sighed but said no more. She didn't press again, but Isabel could feel her watching, wary. Still, the quiet bond between Isabel and Noah grew, like a hesitant flame refusing to go out. One evening, as a storm rolled over Lagos and wind whistled through the palm-lined streets, Noah showed up close to closing time. His gray wool coat clung to him, rainwater dripping onto the Jazzhole floor. The bookstore was mostly empty, except for one elderly man in the poetry section. Hazel had gone home early. Isabel was wiping the counter when Noah walked in, bringing with him the familiar scent of rain and something sadder. I didn't think you'd come in this weather, she said with a soft smile. He shrugged. Didn't have anywhere else to be. For the first time, his voice lacked its usual smooth restraint. It was quiet, tired. Trying to break the heaviness, Noah moved toward the tiny cafe corner in the back of the shop. The espresso machine was a finicky antique, older than both of them combined. You want coffee? He asked, already fiddling with the buttons. Isabel watched, amused. Sure, if you can work that thing without burning the place down. He tried and failed. Beans spilled, steam hissed. Hot water splashed onto the counter. Damn it, he muttered under his breath, clearly frustrated. Isabel couldn't help herself. She burst into laughter, clear, bright, and full of joy she hadn't felt in years. Noah turned, caught off guard, but then a crooked smile tugged at the edge of his lips. I'm not that bad, am I? You look like a teenager doing chores for the first time. For a moment, everything else fell away. The bookstore, the storm, the headlines. There was just laughter and the warmth of a shared quiet space. Eventually, the machine cooperated. They sat across from each other, mugs in hand, the windows fogging from the mix of rain and heat. Noah stared into his coffee before speaking. She left because I wasn't easy to live with. Too cold, too distant, always working. The media, it made her anxious. I don't blame her. Isabel listened, quietly sipping. I know what that's like, she said. I used to blame myself for everything. When my fiancé cheated on me with my best friend, I kept asking what I did wrong. But the truth is, it wasn't me. Noah looked up, his eyes meeting hers fully for the first time. There was no mask, no sarcasm, only something real. And in that moment, they were no longer just awkward acquaintances in a bookstore. They were two people, deeply human, quietly hurting, and somehow beginning again. When Noah left that night, the rain still fell, but Isabel stood behind the counter, smiling, knowing something unspoken had begun to shift. Nothing loud, nothing certain, but enough to make her look forward to next time. The unusual rhythm between Isabel Morgan and Noah West continued, quietly folding itself into their days like an old bookmark between the pages of a favorite novel. Neither labeled it. Neither dared to say too much. But by the time November arrived in Lagos, cooler and calmer than usual, their silent ritual had already taken root. One afternoon, Noah entered the Jazzhole with a different kind of energy. His usual guarded expression had softened into something more deliberate. In his hand was a small, glossy ticket, gold-stamped with elegant lettering, Lagos Book Arts Festival 6th Convention Center. He set the ticket on the counter where Isabel was pricing a stack of old paperbacks. Come with me next weekend, he said, his voice calm and certain. She looked up, startled. To the festival? He nodded. There's a rare book section and a children's corner, like the ones you donate to. Isabel smiled faintly. I don't do well with crowds, remember? The noise, the photos, the people. It feels suffocating. I don't like crowds either, Noah replied simply, but I thought you'd enjoy the stories. She studied him, catching something rare in his expression. Genuine sincerity. But still, she shook her head. I'll think about it. Don't count on me. He didn't push. Not that day. But over the next week, Noah returned almost daily, always with a new reason. One evening, he mentioned a children's author she loved would be signing books. Another time, he brought up a pop-up stall from an obscure French press that sold antique book plates. Once, he didn't bring any reason at all. He just stood beside her and asked quietly, Aren't you even a little curious? Eventually, Isabel laughed. You're persistent. He tilted his head. I don't like hearing no. She shook hers. Then you'll hate this. But inside, her resolve was softening. The moment came unexpectedly, on a calm Saturday morning. Noah arrived with a different flyer. Not the festival this time. Instead, it was a modest outreach event in Lecky Phase 1, a book donation day for underserved schoolchildren. Routine. There won't be crowds, he said. Just you, me, and a few hundred books. Isabel sighed and set her pen down. All right, but only this. No festivals, no interviews. A rare grin spread across Noah's face. Deal. That afternoon, Lagos was gifted rare sunshine. Rain paused long enough for golden light to pour between the flame trees lining the roads. They drove together in Noah's sleek black SUV, her clutching a box filled with gently used children's titles from the Jazzhole, The Velveteen Rabbit, Matilda Anansi stories. The donation venue was modest, a community center tucked beside a school playground. Wooden tables were piled high with donated books. Children ran between stacks, eyes wide with excitement. Volunteers arranged chairs and passed around cold drinks under large canopies. Isabel immediately felt at home. She stepped out with her box and began arranging titles on a small reading table. Noah followed, clearly out of his element, but not willing to stand aside. His hands, more used to managing servers and software deals, fumbled through arranging books, knocking over a pile she had to restack. You really don't have to do this, she teased. He shrugged. I didn't come to just stand around. A few minutes later, a small girl in bright red braids pointed at Where the Wild Things Are and tugged at Noah's sleeve. Will you read this to us, sir? He blinked, looked helplessly at Isabel. She handed him the book. Go on, they won't bite. Noah sat awkwardly in a tiny plastic chair, surrounded by a semicircle of 5 enthusiastic children. He began to read aloud. The night Max wore his wolf suit and made mischief of one kind. His voice was deep and a little too serious. His first attempt at a monster growl was so offbeat it drew snickers. By the second page, the kids were in fits of laughter. Isabel stood to the side, watching, her arms folded, latte in hand, face alight with amusement. Noah shot her a mock glare. You're enjoying this too much. She grinned. It's your growl. It sounds like a tired uncle. Even he couldn't help but chuckle. The kids cheered, calling him Uncle Monster, urging him to keep going. His expression changed, a rare looseness creeping into his posture, a man unlearning stiffness. By the end of the story, one of the boys handed him a squash juice box as a thank you gift. Noah accepted it with a bow so dramatic that the children exploded in giggles. As the event wrapped up, dusk painted the sky in warm hues of amber and indigo. On the ride back to Victoria Island, they drove in silence until Noah said, I've never done anything like that before. She glanced at him. What made you say yes? He hesitated, then said, You. You make it feel easy, natural. Like helping others isn't something you have to plan. You just do it. Isabel looked out the window, and a small smile curling at her lips. The car moved quietly through the tree-lined streets, the scent of earth and rain hanging in the air. A few weeks later, he returned to the Jazzhole, not with a book, but with something else. I've funded a mobile library, he announced, almost shyly, for kids in communities without books. It'll launch next month. Isabel's eyes widened. Seriously? He nodded, then slid a small wooden box across the counter. What's this? She asked. She opened it. Inside was a handcrafted antique book press, mahogany frame, carved details, the kind she once mentioned loving for restoration projects. Her voice trembled. Noah, this is... You don't have to say anything, he said softly. I just thought it belonged with you. When he left that evening, she stood by the window holding the press in her hands, the golden light casting long shadows behind her. She'd never asked for anything, and yet somehow, he kept giving. And maybe, just maybe, something real was beginning. By late November, Lagos had grown colder than usual. The rare Lagos winds swept through the jacaranda trees, sending purple blossoms swirling across the roads. At the Jazzhole, the large windows rattled occasionally with soft gusts, and the city's usual hum seemed quieter, more introspective. Isabel Morgan stood behind the counter, cataloging a shipment of donated books. Her heart had been lighter in recent weeks, lifted by the warmth days shared with Noah West, their quiet bookstore conversations, the donation event, the laughter, the coffee, the unexpected gifts. Their connection still had no name, no promises, but it felt real, like something steady, slowly finding shape. He still visited regularly, sometimes with a takeout cup of cocoa from Mason Kaiser, sometimes with a new book idea for the mobile library, and sometimes with nothing but silence and his tired smile. For the first time in years, Isabel started to believe she was building something that could last, not with words or titles, but with presence. But then, on a breezy Thursday afternoon, the bell above the door chimed, and the energy shifted. She looked up, and the air inside the bookstore thinned. A tall, elegant woman had stepped inside, cream-colored fur coat, flawless makeup, sleek heels clicking on the polished wood floor. Her blonde hair was pulled into a high, glossy ponytail, and her presence drew the eyes of every patron. Isabel blinked, confused, until the woman walked unhesitatingly toward the back of the store where Noah stood, flipping through a copy of Dune. Noah, she called, her voice soft, refined, and sharp. Isabel's breath caught in her throat. It was Elena, Noah's ex-fiancée, the one who'd left him at the altar. The one the entire city whispered about for weeks. Noah looked up, surprise quickly giving way to irritation. His face tightened. Elena, what are you doing here? I needed to see you, she said, approaching. I've had time to think about everything. I was scared, the media, the expectations, your silence. I panicked. Her voice trembled slightly. But I still love you. I never stopped. I want to fix things. Noah didn't move. His jaw clenched. You walked away, Elena. You vanished. No call, no message, just silence. There's nothing to fix. She reached for his hand, but he pulled it away. I'm not the same man you left, he said coldly. Her expression cracked, but only for a moment. You'll regret this, she whispered before storming out, heels echoing against the wooden floor as the door slammed behind her. Isabel hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but she'd been standing in the stockroom's doorway with a box of children's encyclopedias. She'd seen the way Elena touched him. The flicker, just a flicker, of hesitation in Noah's eyes before he pulled away. Her stomach knotted. Not from jealousy, but from the old fear that she was simply someone to pass the time. A momentary balm. A placeholder in someone else's healing. She stepped back, retreating into the stockroom. Her hands trembled as she gripped a familiar worn copy of The Alchemist. She always kept it close, her personal compass. When you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. But now the words rang hollow. All evening, she stumbled. She dropped a stack of books, misfiled an invoice. When a customer asked for a reading suggestion, she handed them the wrong author. And when Noah approached the counter gently, asking if she was okay, she smiled too quickly. I'm fine, just tired. But the look in her eyes betrayed her. That night, alone in her modest apartment off Bourdieu Road, Isabel sat at her desk and stared at the resignation letter she'd typed weeks earlier when a nonprofit in Abuja had offered her a role. She'd turned it down back then. Now she printed it out, signed it. She couldn't stay, not if she was only a patch on Noah's broken past, not if she wasn't truly seen. Jade was the first to find out the next morning. She wasn't impressed. "You're leaving?" she said, arms crossed as Isabel slipped the envelope under the Jazzhole's manager's door. Isabel nodded, bracing. Just because his ex came back? Just because he didn't throw a grand speech in the moment? "It's not about her," Isabel whispered. "It's about me. I'm not doing this again. Not being second place. Not guessing." Jade's eyes narrowed. "You help everyone but yourself. Always giving. Always understanding. When will you let yourself be happy?" Isabel didn't answer. She just picked up her bag and quietly walked out of the store for what she believed would be the last time. But before she left Lagos, she returned one last time, after hours using her staff key. The bookstore was quiet, shelves bathed in golden shadows. She walked to the back corner where Noah always stood and gently placed her copy of The Alchemist on the small reading table, with a handwritten note inside. "Find your treasure." She said nothing more. She took the antique book press he'd given her, packed a small suitcase and boarded a night bus to Abuja the next day. Her heart empty, but steady. She didn't know if leaving was right, but she knew she couldn't stay. Not if she was only ever going to be the girl who hugged a stranger in the rain. The day Isabel left Lagos, Noah West had no idea. He was in back-to-back meetings at Novalink's Banana Island headquarters, finalizing launch plans for the mobile library initiative. He was proud of it, proud of her for inspiring it. But when he walked into the Jazzhole that Saturday afternoon with 2 coffees in hand, one for himself, one for her, something felt off. The air was still. The counter was quiet. Jade stood behind it, arms crossed. "She's gone," she said flatly, sliding a familiar book toward him across the counter. The Alchemist. Inside it, Isabel's note. "Find your treasure." Noah stared at the handwriting, her careful strokes, the words that sounded like goodbye. He blinked, then looked up sharply. "Gone where?" "Abuja," Jade replied, voice laced with disapproval. "A few days ago. New job, new start." Noah's throat tightened. She didn't owe you a goodbye," Jade snapped. "You let your past walk into that bookstore like it still had a place. And now you're surprised she walked out?" He didn't respond. The book in his hand felt heavier than any object he'd ever carried. For the first time in a long time, he panicked. Noah left the Jazzhole and drove straight to all the places where her memory lived. First stop, the National Library branch in Lekki, where she once mentioned loving the children's section. It was quiet. She wasn't there. Next, he visited Terra Culture. She'd once said she adored their rare African poetry nights. Nothing. He even drove past Vesta Blooms, the flower shop on Awolowo Road, where she bought sunflowers for the bookshop windows. The staff shook their heads. No one matching her description had come by. He returned to the Jazzhole every day that week, but Jade only gave him cold looks and silence. "She doesn't want to be found," she finally said. "You're not looking for her. You're chasing what you lost too late." But Noah couldn't accept that. He carried the Alchemist with him everywhere now, stuffed inside his briefcase like a compass. The words "find your treasure" haunted him. Not in a taunting way, but in the way hope sometimes does when you've run out of reason. A few days later, walking along the quiet corridor at the new mobile library depot in Lekki, he remembered something. A random afternoon weeks ago, Isabel had mentioned a nonprofit in Abuja focused on literacy and emotional recovery for children. She said they'd offered her a job. Back then, she turned it down. Could she have changed her mind? He didn't hesitate. That night, he booked a flight to Abuja. Abuja greeted him with warm sun and red earth. It wasn't Lagos, less chaos, more calm, but he didn't feel any peace. He only felt urgency. He visited bookstores in Wusa, public libraries in Maitama, and even a reading cafe in Garki where she might have found work. But no one knew her name. No one had seen a gentle woman with chestnut brown hair and soft eyes. Then, just as he was about to give up, he saw a flyer pinned to the notice board at an NGO hub in Jabi. Read to Heal, a story time for displaced, underserved children, hosted by Bright Minds Initiative guest reader, Miss Isabel Morgan. It was happening the next morning. He barely slept that night. The next day, he stood outside a sunlit community center, tucked between trees and brick walls. From the windows, he heard soft laughter, the rustle of turning pages. And then, a voice. Gentle, familiar, alive. And sometimes the most magical things aren't in books, Isabel was reading, but in the people we meet. Noah stepped inside, heart pounding, and there she was, sitting in a circle of children, wearing a simple gray dress, hair tied back casually, her face radiant as she held an illustrated children's book. The kids clapped, and she smiled, the kind of smile he hadn't seen since that rainy night in the alley. And suddenly, everything he'd been searching for was right there. He didn't speak, not yet. He just watched, frozen. When she stood up to thank the children, she turned and saw him. Their eyes locked. Her breath caught. She didn't move. Neither did he. The room was quiet, just the faint patter of Abuja's breeze against the windows and the rise and fall of two people holding onto a moment they weren't ready to lose again. He was still holding The Alchemist in his hand. He didn't need to open it. He'd already found his treasure. The community center slowly emptied. Children scattered toward waiting guardians, laughter fading into the late afternoon breeze. Still, Isabel and Noah stood on opposite ends of the quiet room, a stretch of wooden floor between them, thick with the silence of everything unsaid. She clutched the children's book in her arms, The Boy Who Dared to Hope, while he held The Alchemist, its spine soft from the countless times he'd thumbed through its pages. Isabel took a cautious step forward, her voice tentative. "Why are you here?" Noah's eyes didn't waver. "Because I let you walk away without telling you the truth." Her throat tightened. "About Elena?" He nodded slowly. "She came back, yes. She asked me to forgive her. But I didn't. I never even considered it. I didn't waver, not for a second." "Then why didn't you say anything?" she asked, voice low but sharp. "Why let me believe I was just temporary?" His grip on the book tightened. "Because I was an idiot. Because I thought I didn't deserve a second chance until I lost you." A long pause settled between them, neither ready to close the distance, but neither willing to leave it open. "I read your note," he continued, lifting The Alchemist. "Find your treasure. I looked everywhere in Lagos, but you weren't there." Her fingers curled tightly around the children's book. "I needed to protect myself, Noah. I've spent too much of my life healing others while neglecting myself." "I know," he said, his voice hoarse, "but you didn't just heal me. You made me want to be someone better." And then without thinking, he stepped forward and wrapped her in a hug. Not the cautious one from the alley, not the tentative ones over coffee. This was full, open, unafraid. She froze at first, stunned, then melted into the embrace, her hands pressing against his chest. His scent, the weight of him, the quiet conviction, it all made her eyes brim with tears. "I needed that first hug to survive," he whispered. "But this one, I needed to live." They held each other in the soft afternoon light, two broken people finding something whole in each other. Eventually, she pulled away, blinking back tears. "I'm not coming back to Lagos just because of a hug." Noah laughed, wiping his face. "I didn't expect you to." "Good," she smirked faintly, "because if we're going to do this, it has to be about more than just us. What do you have in mind?" She had looked around the children's reading room, her gaze drifting to a wall lined with colorful hand-drawn bookmarks. "I want to build something that helps people like us, people who lost, who are trying to rebuild. I don't want to just fall in love. I want to make meaning. Noah stepped closer, nodding. Then let's do it together. And from that moment, the Hug Foundation was born. A nonprofit with a mission to bring healing to broken hearts through books, mobile libraries, and emotional support for women in crisis. Their motto was simple but powerful. Sometimes all it takes is a hug. They returned together, not as lovers with titles, but as partners with purpose. Isabel resumed part-time work at the Jazzhole, but her energy now lived elsewhere, in a modest office space in Lekki, where plans for the foundation were taking shape. Noah, true to his word, backed it entirely. He offered not just money, but strategy, branding, structure. Isabel designed the logo, an open book with two arms embracing. Noah secured a board of advisors and sourced book donations across Nigeria and beyond. But the road wasn't smooth. Just a few months in, they hit a major wall. Funding, running mobile libraries, hiring therapists, and supporting displaced women drained their initial budget. Early donors hesitated, asking for metrics and reports. Some pulled out entirely. In their tiny office late one evening, Isabel sat surrounded by crumpled receipts and worry. "If this keeps up," she whispered, "we'll have to shut down the mobile program." Noah was quiet for a moment, then said calmly, "I'll sell part of my company shares." Her head jerked up. "What?" "Just enough to keep us afloat. I didn't build Novalink to be admired. I built it to make something useful. This is useful." Tears threatened her eyes, but she only nodded. "Then we fight." She proposed a citywide book fundraising event at the Jazzhole, a celebration of stories, a day of free hugs, shared readings, and community unity. Jade, ever skeptical but loyal, agreed to help organize. "I still think you're mad for trusting him again," she teased Isabel, "but if it's for this, I'm in." On a breezy Saturday in March, sunlight streamed through the Jazzhole's tall windows. Hundreds gathered, old books were bought, donated stories were exchanged. Kids from the mobile libraries arrived with hand-painted bookmarks and heartfelt thank you notes. The day ended with music, laughter, and a small speech from Isabel. "This foundation wasn't built by perfect people," she said, "but by two people who found healing through stories and through each other." Noah stood beside her, holding two St. John's lattes, an old habit. "We did it," he whispered. Isabel took the cup, smiled at him, and replied, "No, we're just getting started." And together they looked out into the crowd, not as strangers from a rainy alley, but as partners in something far bigger than either of them had imagined. 3 years had passed since that first embrace in the rain behind St. Gregory's Catholic Church, and Lagos now breathed with fresh spirit. The alley behind the Jazzhole, once damp and forgotten, had transformed into something beautiful. It was no longer just the place where Isabel Morgan had hugged a broken stranger. Now it was called Hug Alley. The narrow path had been paved with new stones. Bright murals danced across the walls, open books, two arms wrapped in embrace, lanterns shining in twilight hues. At the entrance stood a wooden arch with words carved into it, "Hug Alley, where healing begins." The idea had been Isabel's. The execution? All Noah. He hired local artists to bring the vision to life, installed solar lights, placed benches where people could sit and reflect, and added a small bulletin wall where visitors could post handwritten notes of kindness and hope. Today was the third annual Hug Day, an event that had outgrown its humble beginnings. People had traveled from across the city. Volunteers set up reading booths. Kids from the mobile libraries dashed between the bookstalls, gripping well-loved titles. Food vendors handed out puff puffs and hot cocoa. The Hug Foundation's banner waved proudly over the crowd. Isabel stood at the edge of Hug Alley, wearing a soft gray dress, latte in hand, smile radiant. Her gaze wandered over the crowd, strangers hugging, teenagers reading poetry aloud, women laughing under palm trees. She was no longer just the girl from the bookshop. She was the heartbeat of a movement. And beside her stood Noah in a white linen shirt and dark slacks, holding the chubby hand of a toddler with soft brown curls and curious blue eyes. Oliver West, their son. Now a year and a half old, Oliver had arrived the year after their quiet wedding, held in a modest East Lagos chapel. Just close friends, family, and a quiet vow. We won't just love, we'll build. He's Jade, who served as maid of honor, still teased. I can't believe you married a billionaire who cried in an alley. And Noah, once so rigid, so cold, now hummed off-key lullabies to Oliver, changed diapers like a champ, and read picture books with the same dramatic flair he once reserved for boardroom pitches. As the sun began to set over Lagos, casting warm golden light across Hug Alley, Isabel walked toward the mural wall with a small note in her hand. She pinned it gently beside dozens of others, messages from strangers, survivors, readers, dreamers. Her note read, "One hug can change everything." She stepped back and stared at the alleyway, the very spot where 3 years ago she knelt beside a man in a suit who had lost all hope. Back then, she thought she was helping someone else heal. Now she knew that hug had saved her too. Noah joined her, scooping Oliver up in his arms as the boy waved his little book around, giggling. "What are you thinking about?" Noah asked softly. She looked at him, then at their son. "That night," she whispered, "if I hadn't knelt, if I hadn't reached out." "No hug alley," he said, smiling. "No hug day. No Oliver," she added. Noah kissed the side of her head. "I think about it every day." They stood there quietly, watching as the crowd slowly thinned. Children napped on their parents' laps, volunteers packed away leftover books, and the street lamps flickered on, bathing Hug Alley in a gentle golden glow. The Hug Foundation had grown since its first fundraiser. They now had mobile libraries reaching remote towns across Nigeria, and even pilot programs in Ghana. They'd built a permanent wellness center in Abuja for displaced women. Mental health counselors, storytelling groups, grief support circles, all born from one choice, one gesture, one hug. Some evenings, Isabel and Noah would sit in the small Hug Foundation office, Oliver asleep in a crib nearby, and plan their next move. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other, and they had purpose. As the final rays of sunset touched the walls of Hug Alley, Isabel wrapped an arm around Noah's waist. He slipped his free hand into hers. "We've done it," she whispered. He gave her a quiet smile. "No, we're still doing it." And beneath the night sky of Lagos, warm, hopeful, and alive with laughter, Isabel knew she hadn't just hugged a stranger once in the rain. She had found her family, her calling, her forever. And now, together, they hugged the world. Dear viewers, what lesson did you take away from this dramatic tale? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. No,